Some stories find us when we need them most. This is a tale from the old frontier, a time when the West stretched endless and unforgiving, when a wrong turn could cost everything, and a stranger's kindness could change the course of a life. Clara Beckett lost her husband Thomas to illness back in Kansas. He'd dreamed of California, begged her to go in his place. So she went. A widow, 47 years old, traveling alone across land she'd never seen. What happened next wasn't what she planned. But then again, the best things rarely are. The map meant nothing now. Clara sat in the dirt beside her broken wagon, the folded paper limp in her hands. 2 days. 2 days heading the wrong direction. And the water was gone. She tipped the canteen over her cracked lips. 3 drops. Maybe 4. The desert stretched in every direction, scrub brush, red dust, silence thick enough to choke on. No road, no landmark. Nothing but heat shimmering off the hard pan like something alive. She'd promised Thomas. California. The ocean he'd never see. The orange groves he'd described from his sickbed with such longing it made her chest ache. She'd promised. And now she would die out here with that promise unkept. Hoofbeats. Clara's head snapped up. A rider approaching from the east, just a dark shape against the white sky. She didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out. She simply waited to see what the desert had sent her. If this opening spoke to you, I'd be grateful if you'd share where you're watching from today. As the old folks used to say, a story shared is a story that lives on. Thank you kindly for being here. The stranger swung down from his horse. Dust rose off his boots. He walked past her without a word, crouched beside the wagon's front axle, ran his hand along the wood. Broken clean through. He stood, wiped his palm on his trousers. Where you headed? California. He turned his head, looked at her for the first time. Sun-weathered face, deep lines around the mouth, eyes the color of creek mud after rain. California's that way. He pointed west. You've been going east for 2 days. Clara said nothing. Her throat was too dry for shame. The man walked back to his horse, pulled a canteen from the saddle, held it out to her. Drink, slow. You gulp it down. You'll be sick. She took the canteen. The water hit her cracked lips, her swollen tongue, slid down her throat like something holy. She wanted to drain it. She made herself stop after 4 swallows. More, he said. You're gonna need it. 3 hours to town. She drank again. The world steadied. The black edges around her vision pulled back. He checked her horse next legs, hooves, the way it stood. Animal's still good. I'll tie her to my saddle. You ride behind me or you walk. Your choice. She chose to ride. 3 hours in silence. The man's back stayed straight in front of her, his shoulders a wall she couldn't see past. The leather of his saddle creaked with each step. Her thighs ached from gripping the horse's flanks. She hadn't ridden double since she was a girl in Pennsylvania, hadn't been this close to a man who wasn't Thomas in 23 years of marriage. What's your name? The words came out rough, her voice still rusted. Silas? Garrett? She waited. He didn't ask hers. Clara Beckett? He nodded once, didn't turn around. The town appeared as the sun touched the horizon, a scattering of buildings along a single dirt road. A white church steeple? A general store with a sagging porch? A sign that read Sycamore Creek in faded letters. People stopped to stare. Clara felt their eyes on her tangled hair, her dust-caked dress, the dark circles under her arms. A woman in a calico bonnet whispered something to her companion. Silas reined up in front of a 2-story building. Harmon's. She's got rooms. Inside, a gray-haired woman stood behind a counter, spectacles perched on her nose. She looked Clara over slowly, deliberately. $1 a night, paid in advance. Silas set a silver coin on the wood. One night. I'll bring her to Gus in the morning. You know this woman. No? Then why? Because you ask too many questions. He was gone before Clara could speak. She stood in the doorway, the empty canteen still in her hand, watching his shadow disappear around the corner. 3 hours. Not once had she thought of Thomas. The blacksmith's forge breathed heat like a living thing. Clara stood at the edge of the open shed, watching Gus circle her wagon. He was a thick man, arms roped with muscle, leather apron stained dark with years of soot and sweat. He crouched beside the front axle, ran his fingers along the split wood, clicked his tongue against his teeth. Oak, he said. Good oak, too. Shame. Can you fix it? He straightened, then wiped his hands on his apron. The smell of hot metal hung in the air, mixed with coal smoke and horse manure from the stable next door. I can fix anything, ma'am. Question is when. He walked to a barrel in the corner, pulled out a piece of wood, held it up to the light, shook his head. Put it back. This here axle needs white oak. Seasoned. I ain't got none. Clara's fingers found the small leather purse in her pocket. How long to get some? Santa Fe's got a supplier. Good man. Reliable. Gus scratched his chin, leaving a dark streak across his jaw. 16, 17 days. Maybe more if the road washes out. 17 days. The number sat in Clara's chest like a stone. $1 a night at Mrs. Harmon's. $17 she didn't have. She had $14.23. Counted 3 times last night by candlelight in that small room with its thin walls and creaking floor. I'll let you know, she said. Her voice came out steady. She'd learned that skill nursing Thomas how to keep her face still while everything inside her crumbled. The general store smelled of coffee beans and molasses and something sour she couldn't name. Barrels lined the walls, stamped with names from places she'd never been. St. Louis, Chicago, New Orleans. A woman stood behind the counter, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, spectacles hanging from a chain around her neck. Help you? Just looking. The woman's eyes moved over Clara's dress, her dusty boots, the way she held her purse too close to her body. You're the one Silas brought in yesterday? Yes, ma'am. Millicent Porter. This is my store. She didn't offer her hand. Where are you from, Kansas? Before that, Boston. Something shifted in Mrs. Porter's face. A flicker of interest, quickly hidden. Boston. You educated. I was a teacher. Before I married. Teacher. Mrs. Porter set down the jar she'd been polishing. What did you teach? Reading, writing, the arithmetic through long division. The bell above the door jingled. A thin man in a black coat stepped inside, collar white against his weathered neck. He moved like someone who'd learned patience the hard way. Each step deliberate and slow. Morning, Millicent. Morning, ma'am. He tipped his hat to Clara. Reverend Samuel Whitmore. I don't believe we've met. Clara Beckett. The widow from Kansas? He nodded slowly. Silas mentioned you at the livery this morning. Said you're headed for California. That was the plan. Was Clara's throat tightened? My wagon needs parts. 17 days. The blacksmith says. Reverend Whitmore exchanged a look with Mrs. Porter. Something passed between them. Unspoken. The Reverend turned back to Clara, his eyes kind but tired. Mrs. Beckett, I don't mean to pry, but Millicent here tells me you taught school in Boston. That's right. We haven't had a teacher in Sycamore Creek for 2 years, not since Miss Adelaide ran off with that prospector. He shook his head. The children have forgotten half their letters. Parents do what they can, but most of them can barely read themselves. The bell jingled again. Clara turned. Silas stood in the doorway, hat in his hand. He nodded once at the Reverend, then walked past Clara to the counter. Pound of coffee? Millicent? The good kind? Since when do you drink the good kind? Since today. Mrs. Porter measured beans into a cloth sack, tied it with string. Silas paid, tucked the bag under his arm. He was halfway to the door when he stopped, turned back. Gus tell you about the axle? Clara nodded. 17 days. Where are you staying? I don't know yet. Silas looked at her. Really looked, for the first time since he'd found her in the desert. His eyes moved across her face, down to her hands still clutching that small leather purse. He didn't ask how much money she had. He didn't need to. I got a ranch 3 miles out. Small place. 20 head of cattle. Some chickens. He paused. Got a spare room? My wife don't use it anymore. The words hung in the air. Don't use it anymore. Not doesn't need it? Not moved away? Don't use it anymore. I couldn't impose Ain't imposing if I'm offering. He put his hat back on, adjusted the brim. Room's just sitting there. You can cook if you want, help with the garden, or don't. Up to you. Mrs. Porter leaned forward on the counter. Reverend Whitmore stood very still. Clara's mind raced. A stranger. A man she'd known less than a day, Miocon. His wife who didn't use the room anymore. Every warning her mother had ever given her screamed against it. But her mother had never sat in the dirt with an empty canteen, watching the desert stretch endless in every direction. Her mother had never buried a husband and crossed 1,000 miles alone. You're not afraid of having a stranger in your house? Silas almost smiled. Almost. What are you going to steal my chickens? I don't know how to catch chickens. Then I reckon I'm safe. She should say no. She should find another way, sell something. Work at the boarding house. Beg for credit at the general store. That's what a proper widow would do. That's what Thomas would have expected. Thomas, who had expected her to cross a continent alone. Thomas, who had made her promise California with his dying breath without ever asking if she wanted to go. I'll pay you back, Clara said. When the wagon's fixed. Don't need paying back. I'll pay you anyway. Silas shrugged. Suit yourself. He turned toward the door. I'll bring a horse round to Harmon's in an hour. Pack light. Road's rough. He was gone before she could change her mind. Mrs. Porter let out a breath. Well, that's the most words I've heard Silas Garrett speak in 4 years. Reverend Whitmore touched Clara's arm gently. He's a good man. Mrs. Beckett. Quiet, but good. Lost his wife to fever back in '82. Been alone out there ever since. Clara nodded, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about the room that Silas's wife didn't use anymore. She was thinking about 17 days in a stranger's house. She was thinking that for the first time since Thomas died, she had no idea what came next. The ranch appeared over a low rise, and Clara pulled back on the reins without meaning to. A house, small, single-story, built of weathered pine planks that had gone silver in the sun. A porch ran the length of the front. 2 rocking chairs, side by side. One of them sat clean in its lines. The other wore a thick coat of dust, untouched for what looked like years. Silas rode ahead without stopping. Clara followed. They passed a paddock where cattle stood in loose clusters, maybe 20 head, their hides red-brown against the yellow grass. A chicken coop leaned against the barn. 6 hens pecking at the dirt. A vegetable garden stretched behind the house. Rows of beans and squash, and something green she couldn't name from this distance. Then, at the corner of the property, a small fenced square, white pickets, waist high. Inside, a single headstone. Silas didn't slow, didn't point, didn't explain. Clara read the words as they passed Martha Garrett, 1831 to 1882. Beloved wife. 4 years. He'd been alone out here for 4 years. They dismounted at the barn. Silas took her horse, led both animals inside. Began unsaddling without a word. Clara stood in the doorway, watching his hands work the leather straps with practiced ease. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat and old wood. Dust motes floated in the slanted light. House is that way? Silas didn't look up. Door's not locked. Pick any room you want except the one on the left. That's mine. Clara walked across the yard alone. The front door opened with a creak. Inside, the air sat heavy and still, thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else lavender. Maybe, or some dried herb she couldn't place. A main room stretched before her, kitchen on one side, sitting area on the other. A cast iron stove dominated the kitchen wall. Charter oak stamped on its door. A copper pot hung from a hook above it, its bottom black with use. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, a photograph in a wooden frame. Clara crossed the room, picked it up. Silas, younger by a decade, his face fuller, his eyes lighter. He was smiling, actually smiling, with his arm around a woman in a white dress. She had fair hair pinned up in the style of 15 years past. And she was looking at him instead of the camera. Looking at him like he was the only thing in the room worth seeing. Martha. Clara set the photograph down carefully. Exactly where it had been. The bedroom on the right had a narrow bed, a washstand with a chipped basin, a small window that looked out toward the vegetable garden. Simple. Clean. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Handmade. The stitches small and even. She opened the wardrobe to hang her spare dress. Inside, 3 calico dresses hung in a row. Faded blue, faded yellow, faded pink. A wooden comb sat on the shelf above them. A few strands of fair hair still caught in its teeth, and tucked in the corner, a Bible with a cracked leather cover. Clara pulled it out, opened the front page. Martha Ellen Garrett, written in careful script, given on the occasion of her marriage. September 14th, 1856. She closed the Bible, put it back, closed the wardrobe door. The dresses stayed where they were. By the time Silas came in from the barn, Clara had found flour in a tin, salt pork in the cellar, dried beans in a jar on the shelf. The stove took 3 tries to light the damper stuck, and she burned her finger on the match, but eventually the fire caught and held. She put water on to boil, soaked the beans, cut the salt pork into chunks. Silas stopped in the doorway. His eyes moved from Clara to the stove to the pot beginning to steam. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He stood there another moment. Then he went to the basin, washed his hands and face, dried them on a cloth that hung from a nail, sat down at the table without another word. They ate in silence. Beans and salt pork and cornbread Clara had made from meal she'd found in a crock. The food was plain too much salt, not enough fat, but Silas cleaned his plate, wiped it with the last piece of bread, set down his fork. "How long since someone cooked for you?" Clara asked. "For 4 years? What did you eat? Cold things, canned things." He pushed back from the table. "Sometimes I forgot. Forgot to eat. Forgot it mattered." He stood, carried his plate to the basin, left it there, walked out to the porch without looking back. Clara washed the dishes in water she heated on the stove. The soap was harsh and yellow, homemade from the smell of it. She dried each plate with a cloth, stacked them on the shelf where she'd found them. The kitchen looked the same as before, as if she'd never touched it. Outside, the sky had gone purple with dusk. She poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she'd made, carried them to the porch. Silas sat in the clean rocking chair, the one without dust. The other chair waited beside him, its seat gray and furred with 4 years of neglect. Clara held out a cup. He took it. She looked at the dusty chair, at the space it occupied, at what it meant to sit there, in the place where Martha had sat, watching this same sky go dark over this same land. "Chair won't bite," Silas said. Clara stayed standing. Her fingers tightened around the warm cup. The coffee smelled of smoke and earth. He didn't push, didn't ask, just sipped his coffee and looked out at the darkening fields, at the cattle settling for the night, at the small white fence in the corner where his wife lay buried. Clara drank her coffee standing up. When she finished, she said goodnight and went inside. The bedroom was dark. She lit the whale oil lamp on the dresser, its flame softer and steadier than the coal oil she was used to. The bed was harder than the one at Mrs. Harmon's, the pillow flatter. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Footsteps on the porch, back and forth, back and forth. Silas, pacing. She listened for an hour, maybe more. The footsteps never stopped, never went inside, just back and forth, like a man walking the edges of something he couldn't name. Clara turned on her side, closed her eyes. In the wardrobe across the room, 3 dresses hung in the darkness. A comb held strands of hair from a woman 4 years dead. A Bible waited with a name written inside that wasn't hers. This house was still waiting for someone to come home. And Clara knew, with a certainty that settled cold in her stomach, that she was not that person. She was a guest in a place preserved for a ghost. A temporary presence in a space that belonged to someone who would never return. 17 days. She would stay 17 days and then she would leave for California. And Silas Garrett would go back to eating cold food alone at that table, pacing this porch in the dark, keeping those dresses hanging in a wardrobe no one opened. The footsteps stopped. Clara held her breath. A door opened somewhere in the house, closed. Then silence. She lay awake a long time after that, listening to the nothing, wondering why the quiet felt heavier than the pacing had, wondering what it meant that he'd finally gone and wondering what Martha would think if she could see a stranger sleeping in her room, drinking coffee from her cups, standing beside her chair without the courage to sit down. The knock came on the fifth morning. Clara was elbow-deep in bread dough when she heard it 3 sharp raps against the front door. She wiped her hands on her apron, left flour fingerprints on the wood as she pulled it open. Reverend Whitmore stood on the porch, hat in his hands, his black coat already dusty from the ride out. Behind him, Silas paused mid-swing at the fence line, hammer raised, watching. "Mrs. Beckett, forgive the early hour." "Reverend." Clara stepped back. "Would you like some coffee?" "I would. Thank you. But I've come with a purpose. And I'd best state it plain." He glanced toward Silas, then back to Clara. "The children of Sycamore Creek need a teacher. You're a teacher. I'm asking if you'd consider helping us out just until your wagon's fixed. No obligations beyond that." Clara's hands found the edge of her apron, twisted the fabric. "I'm only here for a couple of weeks, maybe less." 2 weeks is better than nothing. These children haven't had proper lessons in 2 years. Most of them have forgotten how to write their own names. From the fence line, Silas's voice carried across the yard. "You got 16 days of sitting around. Might as well do something useful." Clara turned. He wasn't looking at her, just swinging the hammer again, driving a nail into the post with one clean strike. The Reverend waited. 16 days. 16 days of cooking meals for a man who barely spoke, of sleeping in a dead woman's room, of counting hours until she could leave for a place she'd never wanted to go. "Where would I teach?" "The church. We've got benches, a slate board, not much else, but it's a start." Clara looked at her hands. Flour caked under her fingernails, in the creases of her knuckles. Teacher's hands. Once. Before Thomas. Before Kansas. Before everything narrowed down to sickroom duties and promises made to dying men. "Tomorrow," she said. "I can start tomorrow." The church smelled of pine sap and candle wax and something musty underneath old hymnals, maybe, or the wool blankets folded in the corner for winter services. 8 children sat on the front pews, arranged roughly by size. The smallest couldn't have been more than 6, her feet dangling above the floor. The oldest was a boy of 12 or 13, arms crossed, jaw set in the particular way of youth forced to sit still. Clara stood at the front, a piece of chalk in her hand, the slate board propped on an easel behind her. Her heart knocked against her ribs. Her palms were damp. She hadn't stood before a classroom in 9 years. "Good morning," she said. Her voice came out thin. She cleared her throat, tried again. "Good morning. My name is Mrs. Beckett. I'll be your teacher for the next few weeks." The smallest girl raised her hand. Blonde hair in 2 braids, tied with scraps of blue ribbon. "Are you the lady Mr. Silas found in the desert?" A ripple of whispers. Clara waited for it to settle. "Yes, I am. Were you going to die?" "Lily?" A woman in the back pew, the girl's mother, from the matching braids, shook her head sharply. "It's all right." Clara set down the chalk. "Yes, Lily. I might have died if Mr. Garrett hadn't found me. That's why it's important to know how to read a map. Which brings us to our first lesson." She turned to the board, drew the letters of the alphabet in 2 neat rows. Her hand remembered the motion, the curves, the angles, the way the chalk felt between her fingers. Muscle memory from a life she'd thought was over. Who can tell me what this letter is? Silence. Clara pointed to the first letter. This is a... Can you say it with me? A. 8 voices, uneven, uncertain. Good. This is B. B? They went through the alphabet twice. By the third time, the youngest children were bouncing in their seats, calling out letters before Clara could point to them. The older boy, Tommy, she learned, sat rigid, refusing to participate, his eyes fixed on the window. Tommy, Clara walked toward him. Would you like to try? I know my letters. Then show me. He looked at her for the first time. Dark eyes, wary. Dirt under his fingernails. A tear in the knee of his trousers that had been mended and torn again. What for? Because knowing something and showing it are different skills. Both matter. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the board, picked up the chalk, wrote his name in shaky capitals, T-O-M-Y. Almost, Clara said. You're missing a letter. Here. She took the chalk from his hand, added the second M. Tommy, 2 M's in the middle. Try again. He wrote it correctly this time, stared at the word like he'd never seen it before. That's your name, Clara said. That's who you are, written down. No one can take that from you now. Tommy sat down without a word, but his arms weren't crossed anymore. By noon, Clara's voice was hoarse, and her feet ached from standing. The children filed out one by one, collected by mothers and older siblings, sent off with promises to practice their letters at home. Lily was the last to leave, lingering by the door while her mother gathered the younger ones. Mrs. Beckett, Clara crouched down to the girl's level. Yes, Lily, are you going to stay? The question hit Clara somewhere beneath her ribs. She thought of California, of Thomas's voice, thin and urgent in that Kansas bedroom, of the ocean he'd described, the orange groves, the new life he'd wanted for her. I don't know yet, she said. Lily's small hand found Clara's, squeezed tight. Please don't go. I want to learn to read. Clara couldn't speak. She squeezed back, then let go. The girl ran off to join her mother. Clara stood alone in the empty church, chalk dust on her fingers, the silence pressing in around her. The ride back to the ranch took longer than usual. Clara let the horse walk at its own pace, watching the land roll past brown grass, red dirt, the occasional scrub oak casting thin shadows. The sun hung low and orange on the horizon by the time she reached the house. Silas was on the porch. 2 cups of coffee sat on the rail, steam rising in the cooling air. Clara dismounted, tied the horse, climbed the steps. She didn't sit, not in Martha's chair, not yet, but she took the coffee he offered and leaned against the post. How'd it go? There's a boy, Tommy. He couldn't spell his name. Can he now? Yes. Silas nodded, sipped his coffee, waited. The words came before Clara could stop them about Lily's braids and Tommy's stubbornness, about the youngest child who kept falling asleep during the alphabet, about the chalk that felt so familiar in her hand, the way the letters came back to her like something she'd forgotten she knew. She talked until her coffee went cold, until the stars came out one by one, until her voice gave out and she had to stop. The rush of words surprised her. She hadn't meant to say so much, but something about the porch, the quiet, the way Silas just listened without interrupting it, made the talking easier than silence. Silas hadn't moved, hadn't interrupted, just sat there, rocking slowly. watching her. "One of them asked where California was," Clara said finally. "I almost told her I didn't know." "Do you—" "I know the direction. I don't know what it looks like. Might look like this. Dirt, sky, people." Clara stared out at the darkening land. "Then why go at all?" The rocking chair creaked once, twice. Silas was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I asked Martha that once," he said. "About some place she wanted to go. She couldn't tell me either." Clara turned to look at him. His face was half in shadow, half lit by the lamp glow from the window. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the small white fence in the corner of the yard, at the headstone she couldn't read from here, but knew by heart now. She looked down at her hands. Chalk dust still lined the creases of her palms, white against the weathered skin. Teacher's hands. Her hands. All day long through the alphabet. Through Tommy's name. Through Lily's question, she hadn't thought about California once. Not once. The 8th day began like the 7th. And the 6th. And the 5th. Clara woke before dawn, dressed in the gray light, walked to the kitchen. She made coffee in the copper pot, poured 1 cup for herself, left the other on the table where Silas would find it when he came in from feeding the cattle. She ate a piece of bread with butter, washed her cup, set it upside down on the shelf to dry. By the time Silas's boots hit the porch, she was already saddling her horse. They passed each other in the yard. He nodded. She nodded. Neither spoke. This was the routine now. This was how they lived. The teaching filled her mornings. 8 children, then 10, then 12, as word spread to the outlying farms. Clara borrowed a McGuffey reader from Reverend Whitmore, copied passages onto the slate board. Had the children recite until their voices blurred into one. Tommy learned to write complete sentences. Lily could spell her own name and her mother's and her baby brother's. The youngest boy, Samuel, fell asleep less often. The afternoons belonged to the ranch. Clara weeded the garden, gathered eggs, hung laundry on the line strung between 2 posts behind the house. She learned which hen pecked and which one didn't. Which rows of beans needed water and which were drowning from the last rain. Her hands grew rough. Her shoulders ached at night. She slept deeper than she had in years, and every evening, without fail. She and Silas ended up on the porch. It happened without planning. The 9th night. She brought out coffee, and he was already there, rocking slowly, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The 10th night. He had 2 cups waiting on the rail. By the 12th night. Clara stopped hesitating at the dusty chair. She just sat down. Silas glanced at her, said nothing, kept rocking. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't the silence of strangers, any more that careful. Guarded quiet of 2 people taking each other's measure. This was something else. Easier, familiar. The silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. "Tell me about her," Clara said on the 12th night. The words came out before she could stop them. Silas's rocking chair creaked once, twice. He didn't ask who she meant. "She liked mornings," he said finally. "Used to wake up before me, make biscuits, have them ready when I came in from the barn. Said the smell of fresh bread was the best way to start a day." Clara looked at the cup in her hands. She'd been making coffee every morning, leaving it on the table. She hadn't thought about why until now. "What else?" Silas was quiet for a long time. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, high and lonesome. The cattle shifted in the paddock, their bodies dark shapes against the darker hills. She knew she was dying, he said. 6 months before the end. The doctor told her straight. She didn't cry, didn't scream. Just went out to the garden and started digging, planting, flowers. His voice stayed flat, steady, like he was reading from something written down. Around her own grave, said she wanted something pretty to look at. For me. After she was gone. Clara's throat tightened. She thought of the white fence, the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, purple and white asters growing thick around the headstone. Martha had planted them herself, knowing. Were you angry, she asked, when she died? Yes? At her? At everything? Silas set down his cup. His hands hung loose between his knees, rough and scarred from decades of work. Angry at her for leaving. Angry at myself for not stopping it. Angry at God for letting it happen. Angry at the whole world for keeping on turning like nothing had changed. And now, he turned his head, looked at her for the first time since they'd sat down. His eyes caught the lamplight from the window, amber and deep. Now I'm just tired. Clara understood that. She understood it in her bones, in the marrow, in the place where exhaustion lived, like a permanent guest. 3 years of being tired, 3 years of carrying something she couldn't put down. Thomas wanted California, she said. The words came slowly, dragged up from somewhere she'd kept locked. He talked about it for years. The ocean, the weather, orange trees in the yard. A fresh start. She paused. I never wanted to go. Silas didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. He got sick, and all he could talk about was California. How I'd love it there. How I'd finally be happy. Clara's hands tightened around her cup. He never asked if I wanted to go. He just assumed, and I never corrected him. Why not? How could I? The words came out sharper than she intended. He was dying. He was lying in that bed, getting thinner every day. And all he wanted was to believe I'd be happy somewhere. How could I take that away from him? The coyote called again, closer now. The chickens rustled in their coop, nervous. He was sick for 6 months, Clara said. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I took care of him alone, fed him, bathed him, changed the sheets when he couldn't control himself anymore. She stopped, drew a breath that shook. There were nights when I wished it would end, when I lay awake in the dark and prayed for it to be over. Not for him. She swallowed. For me. The words hung in the air between them. Clara waited for Silas to pull back, to look at her differently, to see the terrible thing she'd just confessed and judge her for it, the way she'd been judging herself for 3 years. He didn't move. I understand, he said. Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard. You do? Martha was sick for 3 months at the end, toward the last weeks. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just lay there, hurting, waiting for something that wouldn't come fast enough. He picked up his cup again, turned it slowly in his hands. I loved her more than anything I've ever known. And there were nights I wished she'd just go, so she wouldn't hurt anymore, so I wouldn't have to watch. The lamp flickered in the window. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped and snorted. "I never told anyone that," Clara said. "Neither did I." They sat in silence. But it was different now. The weight Clara had carried for 3 years shifted, just slightly, like a stone moved an inch to the side. Still there, still heavy, but not quite so crushing. "Why do you come out here every night?" she asked. Silas's chair creaked. "Used to pace. After Martha died. Couldn't sleep, so I'd walk. Back and forth, for hours sometimes. I heard you. That first night. Figured you did." He looked out at the fields, at the white fence barely visible in the darkness. "Don't pace anymore." "Why not?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. The stars had come out thick and bright, the Milky Way a pale river across the sky. No city lights for 100 miles, just darkness and distance and the endless frontier. "Because now there's someone to sit with," he said. Clara didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Just sat there, in Martha's chair, drinking cold coffee, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. When she finally went inside, Silas stayed on the porch, but he wasn't pacing. He was sitting in his chair, still rocking, still looking out at the land he'd worked for 30 years. Clara lay in bed that night, listening to the silence. No footsteps, no pacing. Just the wind in the grass and the distant call of that coyote and the sound of her own breathing. She thought about Thomas, about his hands, once strong, growing thin and pale on the bed sheets, about his voice rasping that word, California, like a prayer. She thought about Silas, about flowers planted around a grave by the woman who would fill it, about a man who'd spent 4 years pacing a porch because he couldn't bear to sit in a chair meant for two. And she thought about herself, about the woman she'd been in Boston, chalk dust on her fingers, children's voices filling a room, about the woman she'd become in Kansas, hollowed out by grief and duty, and promises she'd never asked to make. Tomorrow she would teach again. Tomorrow she would cook dinner and sit on the porch and drink coffee with a man who understood what it meant to wish for an ending. But tonight, alone in the dark, Clara faced the question she'd been avoiding for 3 years. What did she actually want? The 16th day broke hot and still. Clara was wiping down the slate board when the church door opened. She turned, expecting a late student, and found Gus standing in the aisle. His leather apron was gone, replaced by a clean shirt buttoned to the collar. He held his hat in both hands, turning it by the brim. "Morning, Mrs. Beckett." "Got news." Clara set down the rag. Her students, 14 of them, now went quiet. "Oak came in yesterday on the supply wagon," Gus said. "Good wood. Better than I hoped." He smiled, showing a gap where a tooth had been. "I'll have your wagon ready day after tomorrow. Maybe sooner if the weather holds." 2 days. The words hung in the air. Clara's hand found the edge of the slate board, gripped it. The children watched her. Gus watched her, everyone waiting for her to speak. "Thank you," she said. The words came out wrong, too quiet. too flat. Gus's smile faltered. Figured you'd want to know right away. California's waiting, right? Right. Clara's tongue felt thick. Right. Thank you for coming to tell me. He nodded, uncertain, and backed out of the church. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. Silence. Then Lily's voice, small and clear. Mrs. Beckett, does that mean you're leaving? Clara looked at the girl. Blonde braids, blue ribbons, eyes too big for her face. Lily had learned to write her own name last week, had stood at the board and traced each letter with her finger, whispering them like secrets, Lily. Her whole body trembling with the pride of it. I don't know yet, Clara said. But you said California. You said you were going to California. I know what I said. So are you going? Clara's throat closed. She stared at Lily. At all of them, Tommy, with his careful handwriting. Samuel, who stayed awake through whole lessons now. The Henderson twins who'd started bringing their baby sister just so she could hear the alphabet songs. 14 children. 14 faces. 14 people who'd started to believe she would stay. Class is dismissed for today, Clara said. But it's only, I said dismissed. Her voice cracked on the last word. The children flinched. Clara turned away, pressed her palms flat against the slate board. The chalk dust smelled of limestone and dry heat. She heard the shuffle of feet, the creak of pews, the whispered questions as they gathered their things and filed out. When the door closed, she was alone. Her legs gave way. Clara slid down the wall, sat on the wooden floor, drew her knees to her chest. The church was empty. The silence pressed against her ears, like water. She stayed there, not moving, until the light through the windows turned from white to gold. The ride back to the ranch took twice as long as usual. Clara let the horse walk, didn't urge it faster, didn't care that the sun was setting and dinner would be late. Her hands trembled on the reins. Her eyes burned with tears she wouldn't let fall. She'd snapped at her students, sent them away with nothing but a sharp voice and a turned back. What kind of teacher did that? What kind of person? The same kind who'd wished her dying husband would hurry up and die. The ranch house came into view. Silas was nowhere in sight. No hammer sounds from the fence line, no figure moving in the paddock, just the house sitting quiet in the fading light, and the white fence in the corner where Martha lay beneath her flowers. Clara dismounted at the barn. Her foot caught in the stirrup. She stumbled, fell forward, landed hard on her hands and knees in the dirt. Pain shot up her wrists. Her palms scraped against gravel and dried manure. The smell of animal waste and earth and decay filled her nose. She didn't get up. She stayed there, on her hands and knees in the filth, her dress soaking up the mud from yesterday's rain, her hair falling loose around her face. A 47-year-old woman crawling in the dirt behind a stranger's barn. This was what she'd become. This was who she was. A fraud. A coward. A woman who couldn't tell her dying husband the truth. Couldn't tell a room full of children goodbye. Couldn't even dismount a horse without falling on her face. The tears came then. Not the dignified kind. The ugly kind, snot running down her lip. Breath hitching in her chest. Sounds coming out of her that didn't sound human. She pressed her forehead to the ground and let it happen. Let herself be broken in a way she hadn't allowed since Thomas's funeral. When it stopped, she was empty, scraped out, Her dress was ruined. Her hands were bleeding, and she could taste dirt on her tongue. Clara pushed herself up, walked to the water trough, washed her hands. Her face? Watched the brown water drip from her chin. The horse stood nearby, watching her with patient eyes. She went inside without looking for Silas. The bedroom was dark. She didn't light the lamp, just sat on the edge of the bed, her ruined dress leaving smears on the quilt, and stared at the wardrobe across the room. Her carpet bag sat beside it, the same bag she'd carried from Kansas, the same bag Silas had moved inside that first day. She crossed the room, opened it, pulled out the small wooden box she'd buried at the bottom. Thomas's letters. She untied the ribbon with shaking hands. A dozen sheets of paper spilled across the bed, letters written over 3 years of illness. When his hands shook so badly, the words tilted and crawled across the page. She picked up the last one, the one he'd written a week before the end. My dearest Clara, you will like California. The ocean is blue there, I have heard. The oranges grow sweet. The sun shines every day. Don't stay in Kansas after I'm gone. Don't stay in that sad house with all its memories. Go west. Start over. Be happy. You will like it there. I know you will. Always yours. Thomas, you will like it. Not, I want you to go. Not, this is your dream too. Just, you will like it. I know you will. Clara read the words again and again. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. He'd guessed. For 3 years, she'd carried his dying wish like a sacred commandment, dragged herself across 1,000 miles of prairie and desert, because he'd asked her to, and he'd been guessing. He'd assumed. He'd decided what would make her happy without ever once asking. And she'd let him. She'd sat by his bed for 6 months, watched him waste away, held his hand as he faded, and never once said, Thomas, I don't want California. I never wanted California. I want to teach. I want a classroom. I want chalk dust and children's voices and the look on a boy's face when he writes his own name for the first time. She'd had 6 months to tell him the truth. She hadn't said a word, because it was easier to be a good wife than an honest one, easier to nod and smile and make promises than to look a dying man in the eye and say, you don't know me at all. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. The paper crinkled against her ruined dress. She bent forward, her forehead touching her knees, and the sound that came out of her wasn't crying anymore. It was something worse, something that had been building for 3 years and couldn't be held back any longer. When it finally stopped, she lay still on the bed. The room was completely dark now. The letter was crushed in her fist. Her face felt swollen, her throat raw, her body hollowed out like something had been scraped away from inside her. She thought about the porch, the 2 chairs, Silas, who hadn't come to the house tonight. He knew. Of course he knew. News traveled fast in a town this small. He knew the wagon was ready, knew she could leave, knew what was coming, and he'd stayed away, given her space to go without making it harder. Because that's what decent people did. They let go. Clara sat up slowly, smoothed the letter with trembling fingers. Read it one more time in the darkness. The words she knew by heart now. Don't stay in that sad house. But Sycamore Creek wasn't sad. The ranch wasn't sad. The children, the church, the mornings with coffee and the evenings on the porch, none of that was sad. Thomas had been talking about Kansas, about the house where he'd died, the town where she'd nursed him, the memories that lived in every corner. He hadn't known about this place. Hadn't known about Silas? Hadn't known about any of it. If he could see her now, covered in dirt and tears on a dead woman's bed, would he still want her to go? Clara folded the letter, placed it back in the box, closed the lid. 2 days. In 2 days, her wagon would be ready. She could leave, keep her promise, follow the path Thomas had drawn for her 3 years ago. Or she could stay, break the promise, choose something for herself for the first time in 23 years. The choice should have been simple. It wasn't. The tears had dried. The questions remained. Clara woke before dawn, her body stiff from sleeping in her ruined dress. She hadn't moved all night, just lay there in the dark, staring at nothing, turning the same thoughts over and over like stones worn smooth by a river. She got up, changed into her clean dress, the one she'd been saving, washed her face in the basin, the water cold against her swollen eyes, walked through the silent house, past the cold stove, past the empty chairs, out the front door into the gray morning light. The grass was wet with dew. It soaked through her boots. Her hem left dark trails behind her as she walked. She didn't go toward the barn, or the garden, or the road to town. She went to the corner of the property, to the white fence, to the grave she'd been avoiding for 17 days. Martha Garrett. 1831 to 1882. Beloved wife. Clara stopped at the gate. Her hand rested on the latch, rough wood under her fingers. The flowers Martha had planted still grew here, wild asters, purple and white, swaying in the early breeze. They'd survived 4 years without tending. They'd keep surviving long after Clara was gone. She opened the gate, stepped inside, knelt in the damp grass beside the stone. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said. Her voice came out hoarse, cracked from the crying she'd done last night. "I don't know if that's how things work, but I need to talk to someone. And you're the only one who might understand." The asters bent in the wind. A meadowlark called somewhere in the distance. "Your husband found me in the desert. I was lost, dying, probably. He brought me here, gave me a room, let me stay." Clara's fingers found the edge of the headstone, traced the carved letters. "I've been sleeping in your bed, cooking on your stove, sitting in your chair." She stopped, swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to take your place. I didn't come here looking for—" Her voice broke. She pressed her palm flat against the stone, cold and solid. "I don't know what I came here looking for. I had a plan. California. My husband wanted me to go. He made me promise." The wind picked up. The asters swayed harder, their petals bright against the dark earth. "But I don't want California. I never wanted it." The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "I wanted to teach. I wanted a classroom. I wanted children who looked at me like I had something worth giving them. And I gave all that up for Thomas because I loved him and he was sick, and how could I say no to a dying man?" Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard. He guessed wrong. 3 years of my life, walking towards something I never wanted. Because he guessed, and I didn't correct him. Her hand curled into a fist against the stone. "That's not his fault. That's mine. I could have told him. I could have said something, but I didn't. Because I was tired and scared, and I thought being a good wife meant giving up what I wanted." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Now I'm here, in your house, with your husband, and I don't know if staying would be a betrayal of Thomas or—" She stopped, took a breath. "Or if leaving would be a betrayal of myself." The meadowlark called again, closer now. Clara looked up at the sky, pale blue bleeding through the gray, the first edge of sun cresting the hills. "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I know you can't give it, but I want you to know if I stay. It's not because I'm trying to replace you. It's because your husband is kind, and this town needs a teacher, and for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm doing something that matters." She touched the stone one more time. Let her hand rest there. "I think you would have understood. Silas says you wanted children. Wanted to teach them. Watch them grow." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't give you that, but maybe I can give it to someone else." Footsteps behind her. Heavy boots on wet grass. Clara didn't turn around. She knew who it was. Silas stopped at the gate. She heard the latch lift, the creak of the hinges, the soft thud as it closed behind him. He walked to the grave and stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, just there. "Couldn't sleep either?" Clara asked. "No." She looked up at him. His face was half in shadow, half in the growing light. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the headstone, at the flowers, at the name carved into the granite. "I come here sometimes," he said. "When I can't figure something out. Talk to her like she can hear me." He paused. "Probably foolish. I just did the same thing." "I know, I heard." Clara's stomach tightened. She pushed herself to her feet, her knees aching from kneeling in the cold grass. "How much? Enough?" She waited. Her heart thudded against her ribs. The sun was rising now, spilling golden light across the fields, turning the wet grass to fire. Silas finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, lined, carrying 4 years of grief and something else underneath something that hadn't been there 17 days ago. "Martha wasn't the jealous type," he said. "She'd have told me to stop being a fool." Clara almost laughed. Almost. "A fool about what? About letting you go without saying anything." He took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I don't want you to leave." The words hung in the morning air. "I know I got no right to say that," he continued. "We barely know each other. You got plans. You got a husband who wanted California for you." He paused. "I got no claim on any of that. Silas." "Let me finish." He looked at her, really looked, and Clara saw something bare in his face, something unguarded. These last 2 weeks having someone here, someone to talk to, someone who— He stopped, started over. "I forgot what that was like, not being alone." "Would you be angry?" Clara asked. "If I left, angry for what?" "I don't know. People usually get angry. I've been angry plenty. It's tiring." "I'm tired too." Silas nodded slowly. "Then don't go." "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm not asking you anything." He put his hat back on, adjusted the brim. "I'm just saying if you want to stay, I want you to stay. That's all." "I wouldn't be staying for you," Clara said. "You understand that. I know. I'd be staying for me, because I want to teach, because I like it here, because—" She stopped. Because what? Clara looked at the grave between them, at the flowers Martha had planted, at the name of a woman who had faced her own death and chosen to leave something beautiful behind. Because I'm allowed to want something, she said. Even if Thomas didn't know what it was. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Sounds right to me. They stood there together as the sun climbed higher. The asters swayed. The meadowlark sang. The land stretched out around them, golden and endless under the morning sky. I should go, Clara said finally. Where? The church. I need to talk to Reverend Whitmore. Silas almost smiled. About what? Clara looked at him. At the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the quiet patience in his face. A good man. A kind man. A man who'd spent 4 years talking to a grave because he had no one else to talk to. About making the teaching position permanent, she said. The ride into town took 40 minutes. Clara pushed the horse faster than usual, her heart racing, her mind clear for the first time in years. She tied up outside the church and went inside without knocking. Reverend Whitmore was arranging hymnals in the front pew. He looked up, startled. Mrs. Beckett, I didn't expect. I'm staying, Clara said. I'm not going to California. I'm staying here, and I want to teach. Not temporarily, for as long as you'll have me. The Reverend set down the hymnal. His eyes searched her face. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. He smiled, then slow, warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Then welcome to Sycamore Creek, Mrs. Beckett. Officially. Clara shook his hand. Her fingers were trembling. She didn't care. She walked out of the church into the bright morning sun. The town spread out before her, the general store, the blacksmith, the boarding house where she'd spent her first night. People she knew now. People who knew her name. Home. The word settled into her chest. Unfamiliar, but warm. She'd have to figure out what this meant for her, for Silas, for everything. She'd have to write to Thomas's sister in Kansas, explaining why she wasn't coming. She'd have to face the children she'd dismissed so harshly yesterday. Apologize, make it right, Mako? But that could wait. All of it could wait. Right now. Clara stood in the middle of a dusty street in a town she'd never heard of 3 weeks ago, and she breathed in the smell of horses and dry grass and wood smoke, and she knew finally, completely, without doubt, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 months later, the leaves on the cottonwoods had turned gold. Clara stood at the front of the one-room schoolhouse, the old storage barn behind the church, converted over the summer by hands from every family in Sycamore Creek. The walls had been whitewashed. A real slate board hung behind her. Framed in pine, the Henderson brothers had cut themselves. 22 desks filled the room. Built by the carpenter from the next town over, still smelling of fresh wood and linseed oil. 22 children looked back at her. Who can tell me what year the Declaration of Independence was signed? Hands shot up. Tommy's was first, always first now. The boy who'd once refused to participate. Clara nodded at him. 1776. Correct. And who wrote it? Thomas Jefferson. Tommy sat straighter. With help from Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. Very good. Clara turned to the board, wrote the date in large letters. Now, who can spell America for me? A small hand rose in the front row. "Lily," Clara smiled. "Go ahead." The girl walked to the board, took the chalk from Clara's hand. Her braids swung as she concentrated. Tongue pressed between her teeth, she wrote each letter carefully, deliberately. America. The class erupted in applause. Lily's face flushed pink, and something loosened in Clara's chest, a knot she hadn't known was still there. "Perfect," Clara said. "Absolutely perfect." The noon bell rang. Children poured out of the schoolhouse, lunch pails swinging, voices rising into the autumn air. Clara stood in the doorway watching them scatter across the yard when Mrs. Porter appeared beside her. "Mrs. Beckett?" The older woman's voice had lost its edge over the months. "Reverend Whitmore wants to discuss the Christmas pageant. He's thinking something with the children singing." "I'll stop by the church this afternoon." Mrs. Porter nodded, hesitated. "You've done good work here. The children are different now. Better." She paused. "We're glad you stayed." She walked away before Clara could respond. The afternoon passed in lessons and recitations. Clara taught long division to the older students while the younger ones practiced their letters on small slate tablets. Samuel, who never fell asleep anymore, read an entire page from the McGuffey Reader without stumbling once. The Henderson twins' baby sister, now old enough to sit in a desk of her own, learned to write the letter A and held up her tablet for everyone to see. When the final bell rang, Clara stayed behind to clean the boards and stack the primers. The schoolhouse emptied. Dust motes floated in the slanted afternoon light. She stood alone in the room she'd helped build, not with her hands, but with her presence, her choice, her refusal to leave. This was hers. The ride back to the ranch took 30 minutes at an easy pace. Clara let the horse walk, enjoying the cool air, the smell of dry grass and wood smoke from distant chimneys. The land had changed in 3 months, greener near the creek beds where the autumn rains had pooled, browner on the hills where the summer heat had left its mark. The cattle were fatter now, moving slow and content through the yellow grass. She knew this land, knew which trails led where, which gates needed fixing, which neighbors would wave, and which would just nod. Her wagon stood in Silas's barn, wheels good as new, waiting for a journey she no longer needed to take. This was her home now, not a stopping point, not a temporary shelter. Home. Silas was on the porch when she rode up. 2 cups of coffee sat on the rail, steam rising in the cooling air. He didn't get up, just watched her dismount, tie the horse, climb the steps. "How was school?" "Good." Lily spelled America today. The whole word, without help. "That girl's sharp." "She is." Clara picked up her cup, took a sip. The coffee was strong, the way she'd taught him to make it. "Mrs. Porter said she's glad I stayed." Millicent said that, her exact words. Silas almost smiled. The corner of his mouth twitched. Must be getting soft in her old age. Clara sat down in the chair beside him. Martha's chair. She didn't hesitate anymore. Didn't think about it. The wood was worn smooth now from months of sitting, the dust long gone. The cushion she'd added in August fitting perfectly against her back. They sat in silence. The sun dropped toward the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Cattle lowed in the distance. A hawk circled overhead, riding the cooling air, searching for something in the tall grass. "Reverend asked about you today," Clara said. "About me. About us." Silas's cup paused halfway to his mouth. "What'd you tell him? Told him to mind his own church." Now he did smile. A real one. Brief, but there. Good answer. The silence stretched out again. Comfortable. Easy. Clara watched the hawk dive, disappear into the grass, rise again with something small clutched in its talons. The way of things. Life going on whether you watched or not. "I've been thinking," Silas said. Clara turned her head. He was looking straight ahead. Not at her. His jaw set. "About what?" "About Martha. About you." He set down his cup. His hands hung between his knees, rough and scarred. "She's been gone 4 years, and for 4 years, I kept everything the same. Her dresses in the closet, her comb on the shelf, her chair on the porch." He paused. Like changing anything meant she didn't matter. Clara didn't speak, didn't move. "But that's not right," Silas continued. "Martha wasn't like that. She'd have called me a fool for sitting out here alone, talking to her grave, letting the house go cold." His voice roughened. "She'd have wanted me to keep living." "I know. Do you?" He turned to look at her now. Really look. "Because I need you to understand something. What I feel, what's been growing these last months, it doesn't replace her, doesn't erase what we had. It's just different. New." Clara's heart beat steady against her ribs. She held his gaze. "I'm not asking for anything," Silas said. "Not expecting anything. I just need you to know that when I sit here with you, I'm not thinking about her. I'm thinking about you, about tomorrow, about what comes next." The hawk called somewhere above them. The cattle shifted in the paddock. The sun touched the horizon, spilling red light across the land. "I think about that too," Clara said quietly. "You do?" "Every day." Silas's hand moved on the armrest of his chair. Slow, careful. His fingers stopped an inch from hers, waiting. Clara looked at his hand. The calluses, the scars, the dirt beneath his nails that never quite came clean. A working man's hand. An honest hand. She moved her own hand. Closed the distance. Let her fingers rest against his. Neither of them pulled away. "You know," Clara said, "I used to imagine what my life would look like at this age. When I was young, teaching in Boston, I thought I'd have children by now. Grandchildren. Maybe. A house full of noise and people. What happened? Thomas. The name came easier now. He couldn't have children. We tried for years, but it never worked. So I stopped imagining." Silas's fingers curled around hers. Gentle. Warm. "Martha wanted children too," he said. "More than anything. We tried everything. Nothing worked." He paused. "She used to say she would have been a good mother. I think she was right." "She would have been. You would have been too." Clara's throat tightened. She squeezed his hand. "I have children now," she said. 22 of them. They're not mine, but they need me, and I need them." She looked out at the land, at the white fence in the corner, at the flowers still blooming around Martha's grave. "That's enough." Silas nodded slowly. "That's enough." The sun sank below the hills. The sky darkened from red to purple to deep blue. Stars appeared one by one, then dozens, then hundreds, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of pale light. "I'm not good with words," Silas said. "Never have been." "I know. But I want you to understand whatever this is. Whatever it becomes, I'm here. Tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Clara leaned back in her chair. Let the quiet wrap around them. I know, she said. I'm here too. They sat together as the night deepened. The lamp burned steady in the window behind them, casting warm light across the weathered boards. Crickets sang in the grass. The cattle settled for the night. Somewhere far off. A coyote called and another answered. From a distance from the road, maybe. Or the top of the far hill, the ranch house was just a small shape against the darkness. But the light on the porch was visible for miles. Two figures sat side by side, not speaking, not moving. Just there, just together. Clara looked at Silas, at the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the quiet strength in his face. He was looking back at her. Thank you, she said. For what? For finding me. For bringing me here. She paused. For waiting. Silas turned his hand over, laced his fingers through hers. Wasn't waiting, he said. Just wasn't ready. Now I am. The lamp burned on behind them. It didn't flicker. It didn't dim. Some lights, once lit. Don't go out. There's something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Something tender, perhaps a little heavy. The way the air feels after rain has passed, but the ground is still wet. Many of us have carried promises we never asked to make. Some of us have walked toward places we never wanted to go, simply because someone we loved believed it was right for us. And perhaps you have known what it feels like to finally stop walking to look around and realize that the place you landed was never part of anyone's plan. And yet it fits. That kind of arrival does not need to be explained. It does not need to be understood or wrapped up neatly. It is allowed to simply rest, a quiet settling, a breath released after being held too long. Clara found her home in a town she had never heard of, beside a man she met by chance, teaching children who were not her own. None of it was promised. All of it was chosen. And sometimes, that is enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying until the end.